Going. We are live.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Time and Place, the gospel conversation show where we discuss faith on the fringes and do our best to apply God's word to God's world. I'm Solomon, this is Julian, and today we're going to talk about education in the Christian family. But first, Julian, what the heck is going on in the world today?
Today, the reaction to the greatest debate in the history of presidency.
Lincoln Douglas, step aside.
On par. This is taking its place. This is a debate that all of the debates will be measured against going forward.
They're going to make animatronic reenactments
at the Hall of Presidents
at Disney World. I'm going to go watch this. A bunch of 7-year-old men angry at each other. Speaking over you, just walk in, it's just loud noises like speaking over each other. Yeah.
So my initial reaction is that it was not as bad as I was expecting from what everybody was saying.
You watched it later, right?
I watched it today. I didn't watch it live. I needed some space before the craziness happened.
Yeah.
I'm like the guy who buys the iPhone a year later after all the bugs are worked out. I wanted to watch it after I knew what was coming. Yeah, right. But yeah, everybody made it sound like it was the worst thing that had ever happened in the history of America, but I didn't think it was as bad.
What were you expecting?
I was expecting, from what I saw online, I was expecting Trump to just be like foaming at the mouth, blathering idiot, which he was still a loudmouth, but not as that bad. And I was expecting the moderator to be way more pro-Biden and anti-Trump, and he hit Biden pretty hard in some points. Like, he held him to some stuff.
Yeah, Chris Wallace is pretty good. I mean, because he's interviewed Trump before, and he's kind of asked him questions and stuff, and Biden doesn't take interviews really, so that was kind of the thing going into this was all Trump does is talk to people like Bob Woodward and who was the other George Stephanopoulos. Somebody is just like, why are you taking these interviews? And I guess that's his training and for the debate and whatever is just anybody who hates me, I want to talk to you. Okay. Whereas Biden's the exact opposite, and it seems like the media really kind of caters to him of Biden, why is Trump so evil? Those are the questions that Biden gets a lot, I think. And so going into this, I think they're coming from opposite sides. But yeah, man, it's a weird. It's I'm trying to think of any presidential debates I've watched all the way through and remembered. I can't really think of them.
There was a couple of points, man, where I was like, that's a good point, but nobody's going to remember that because of everything that's going on.
Yeah, that happened a lot. A lot where good points were made, and it's but no one's going to remember that. All they're going to remember is just this beat down. And I think you might not be so shocked and you come from the WWE world, right? It's this was nothing, of course, but for
it was just another promo. This was the go home show. This was Hulk Hogan and The Rock face to face before WrestleMania.
You're expecting, so you were expecting Ultimate Warrior,
that's really
tear you apart, brother.
I was waiting for more veins to be popping, but
those videos are nuts of the Ultimate Warrior where he's he flew all up the rocket ship.
And nobody knows what he was talking about. But he looked hyped, so you were into it.
Oh man, I was like, holy crap! But yeah, I think good points were made. But yeah, they're gonna be forgotten. They're everything is just clouded in this crazy arguing, screaming, talking over each other, interrupting. It was just a mess to watch.
The two that stuck out the most was there was one where Biden was trying to hammer Trump on the economy.
Yeah.
He was like, we handed you a great economy and you blew it. And the moderator, this is the part where I was like, he's way more impartial than people are saying. He said, can you really say that's true when unemployment was at a record low until the coronavirus hit? And I was like, that's a valid point.
He did start debating Trump. And I think he was good at the beginning, but then he got worse over time. But I think that's a lot of Trump's fault of just keep talking over.
He didn't even badger him.
Chris Wallace was trying to take control, and Trump just wasn't having it. So then Chris Wallace like drifted to Biden's side. It felt like, you know, because
this guy's yelling at me less, so I like him more.
Because it was yeah, exactly. Because there was a part where Biden was saying, you know, I can't even keep track of what his clown, you know, what he's saying, all the rabble that he's saying, and then Chris Wallace is like laughing, like, yeah, it's hard for me to keep up too. And it's like, okay, you're immediately on his side now, and just like debating Trump yourself, and yeah, it was nuts, man. Yeah, there was a lot of good points as far as like Trump asked Biden, you name one police organization that, yeah, exactly. You name one police organization that's for you, one law enforcement agency that is for you, and Biden didn't have an answer. But the problem is Trump didn't let that sit. You gotta throw that out there and let the silence, speak for you.
Oh.
Yeah, that like seconds of Biden. There's no law enforcement agencies for him. So, yeah. So, but he didn't do that. He just kept talking and talking. So then it gets overcrowded. So then people forget that. It doesn't stick. It doesn't land.
Right.
Whenever you're just going on and on. Yeah, there was a lot of crazy stuff. Like the taxes. Look, Trump's taxes. He said in 2016, "Yeah, I don't pay my taxes. That makes me smart." I mean, like this was what he's saying.
Not wrong.
This was supposed to be like a bombshell from the New York Times that he hasn't paid taxes. He paid $750 in taxes. It's like, oh yeah, that's a bombshell. It's going to sway the election because a lot of Trump supporters. You talk to a Trump supporter, they're like, he should have paid less. That's crazy. And right. You know what? A lot of tax. He cut the corporate tax. A lot of people got like a little money in their pocket for that. So he's anti-tax. Well, so are Republicans, right?
And if anything, he swayed a couple more voters over to his side with that.
Right. And so, but also, he didn't write the tax laws. But he's not doing anything illegal, right? If he's gaming legal tax loopholes, I mean, okay. The argument is that he should voluntarily pay more in taxes when he doesn't have to. It's like, okay, maybe not, but yeah. And then, so like, I don't think that's going to be a big, stick for anybody, for any Trump supporters or whatever.
I mean, that was a lot of Biden's.
It's like, shut up, man.
Would you shut up, man?
Yeah.
A lot of Biden stuff, though, was talking about how much money he was going to give people. There was one point that really stuck me, and I was like, man, he should have hammered him harder there, was the moderator brought up how the Democrats were talking about either stacking the Supreme Court with more justices, more, or a filibuster to keep the vote from happening.
Yeah.
And he asked him if he would support that, and Biden just straight refused to answer that question.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would you not answer that? That doesn't make why?
Yeah, and that was the shut up man part, right? That was like when he was like answering. But it's true. Like Biden's never answered that question. And that needs to be answered. Like, hey, are you going to pack the court? Like, because, look, there's no stopping the vote. Amy Coney Barrett's going to be Supreme Court justice. That's just it. The threat is if you do that before the election, then we'll pack the court. Then we'll stop the filibuster. All these things. And it's like, okay, he has to answer that. And he didn't answer it. He just completely got away with it. And it's like, okay, that sucks. That's yeah. And it's like, oh, you shut up, man. Yeah, that was crazy. The biggest thing I think people are taking away, at least from the headlines I've seen, is the Proud Boys thing. The white supremacists. Like, will you right now condemn white supremacists? And I don't know why Trump doesn't just say yes, F white supremacists. I hate them. I condemn any white supremacist. I condemn any, he's like, well, yeah, I'm willing to. It was almost like, sure, man, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And it's like, why can't you just take a hard line stance against white supremacy? And he's like, give me a name. What, who should I condemn? And then I think Biden or something throw out Proud Boys, white supremacy, Proud Boys. And he said, Proud Boys, okay, stand back and stand down, or stand down and stand
by. Yeah.
And that was just like, and they say, but somebody needs to do something about Antifa, which is 100% true as well.
Also true.
And then what was Biden's response to that? Antifa is an idea. Antifa is not an organization. Antifa is an idea. It's like, and then and Trump was right. You got to be kidding me? Like, are you crazy? So, and so of course everybody runs to go. Who the heck are the Proud Boys? What is the Proud Boys? So, in just even that fact of nobody knowing at all who they are might tell you something of how like dangerous they
Right.
are, right? Like maybe not very dangerous, but they're the evil, the white supremacists that are in the streets every day shooting, black people and leftists and freaking out. They're the dangerous ones, the Proud Boys. Okay, so who are the Proud Boys? I kind of did a deep dive on this. I think, as I'm sure a lot of people did, but okay. So the first time I ever heard about Proud Boys was when Gavin McInnes was on Joe Rogan. But Gavin McInnes is a cartoon character, like is probably the best way to explain it, like describe him. I mean, if you hear him talking for 20 minutes, you're gonna think this guy's a racist, male chauvinist, crazy person. Like he's just nuts. But apparently, this is like his Borat or his Bruno. Like it's like a cartoon character. He's literally like in costume. And apparently, he started like the whole hipster look. Like he, the old timey clothes and the mustache and the suspender. Like he was doing the pen protector and the he kind of started that whole thing.
Well, one of the who he is, kind of one of his big claims is that he was a co-founder of Vice before they went big.
Until they went left, and then they voted him out. They kicked him out basically, and then he started like an advertising agency who also kicked him out for being too crazy.
Yep.
But he is an extremely polarizing. He's permanently banned on Twitter and Facebook. So if you see any videos of him, you understand why. Like he doesn't mince words. He's just which again he's very pro male. He's like an anti-feminist, anti-leftist. Yeah, that's politically incorrect to say. I'm gonna say it because it's politically incorrect to say, not because it's what he truly feels in his heart. I think. Anyway, he was with this guy Anthony Cumia, who was at the Opie Anthony show, who also I think got kicked off. He got canceled. Anthony Cumia. So they have this organization called Compound Media. It's like podcasts and videos and radio shows and things, as far as I know. So, and Gavin McInnes was part of that with Anthony Cumia. And they had a guy that worked with them, like an intern, like a young guy, whatever, named Brett Ratner. And they literally, Anthony Cumia said he literally hired him because his last name was Ratner and they want to call him Rat. And so, and so they hired him, and he's this kind of skinny, goofy kid, very timid and just very kind of like kind of soy boy, guy. And so they were calling him Rat, and they're all like, making fun of him and stuff. Like, oh, why don't you have a girlfriend? Why don't you get laid? Why don't you, and he's just like, I'm waiting for the right girl, whatever. So he's just kind of this like beta, basically, I guess. And they were like, you need to, so they would play, and he would go to Broadway shows and stuff. So of course they just made fun of him for that. And they would play him Broadway show tunes. Like they would play show tunes for him when he was in, they just like mess with him. And I guess it was all in good fun.
Right.
And one of the show tunes that they played for this guy, making fun of him, was from the Broadway version of Aladdin called Proud of Your Boy. And it's like Aladdin singing about his mom, I guess, who he's an orphan. And so he's like, I hope you're proud of your boy. It's just big Broadway, lavish musical number. Right. But they would play it for him. It's called Proud of Your Boy. And they started joking around and say, we should start a gang or a club or a fraternity or something called the Proud Boys, where guys can get together, drink, get laid, talk about girls, and just like, it's like a frat boy, male chauvinist thing. Right. And call it the Proud Boys, from that song and from what they call him and stuff. I guess they're calling him Proud Boy. And so, which again is that like, think of proud, you think of gay pride and like boys and, but it was kind of an attack against that, as far as like against the soy boy look, against the beta look of just like, we're going to cuss, we're going to drink, we're going to talk about girls, we're going to just whatever, even though girls are, I guess, allowed in the Proud Boys. And they have
it's an ironic name.
Yeah, and they have chapters all over the world of all different minorities and ethnic groups. There was actually a black Proud Boy member, like a video of a black Proud Boy member saying, this is ridiculous. So, okay, so anyway, that's how it started. And that was Gavin McInnes' involvement within Anthony Cumia and how it started. Well, like a lot of things, it morphed and evolved into something different. And so because of its it calls itself pro-Western, pro-male, pro-capitalism, pro, Western ideas and stuff, which a lot of people take to mean pro-white, which isn't true, but that's just how it goes. And so that's how it got, and with the complete lack of political correctness at all of anything, it got infiltrated by white supremacists, and Gavin McInnes removed himself from it, disavowed it, said, I don't want this. But how it started, though, with the violence is that Gavin McInnes would speak at colleges or certain places, and Antifa would show up and start riots, basically. So he employed the Proud Boys as like his private security, right? To like so they became anti-Antifa, basically. Okay. And so which meant brawls in the streets with Antifa, right? And again, this is like a handful of brawls in the streets with Antifa. So if you're against Antifa, you must be the FA. You must be the fascist, right? If you fight Antifa, you're the fascist, right? So and so they became the fascist, white supremacist, racist group, right?
Right.
And so that's what it is. And so there was like a big brawl in Kalamazoo, and and again, handful of documented cases of actual Proud Boys causing violence, starting fights, whatever. And most of it is in response to leftist rioters and Antifa crazy people. So that's what the Proud Boys are. And that's basically it. And again, you've never heard of them, right? But I'm pretty sure you heard of Antifa. And I'm pretty sure they're not an idea, right? But that's what's so difficult, is because they're not centralized. They don't have an organized leader like Gavin McInnes that they can scapegoat. They don't have a charter saying these are the rules of Antifa and these are the membership requirements. They don't have all these things that Proud Boys do. Proud Boys have that, like all these membership requirements or whatever. So because they're organized, that's why Gavin McInnes got banned from Twitter, because of Proud Boys. And why people who support Antifa have not been banned from Twitter, because you can't pinpoint, you can't target it, right?
Right.
So so that's what Proud Boys are. That's the whole thing. And when you hear it, it's like an Aladdin song. What? A beta guy? Like what?
Well, it was a couple of guys drinking and making jokes, and it got away from them.
It became 3 guys and 10 guys, and now it's worldwide. Now whatever. But again, you've never heard of them, because that's how minimal these people are. If you compare Antifa to Proud Boys, Antifa has the higher body count. It has the higher property damage count. It has there's no comparison in the danger levels of Proud Boys versus Antifa. And so if Trump is winking and nodding to the Proud Boys, then Biden is winking and nodding to Antifa, 100%. And you got to look at which group is more dangerous. That's just like, if you turn on the news for 5 seconds, you can see this, it's not a lot of Trump supporters out there lighting buildings on fire.
Yeah, I'm not leaving the house. I have never left my house scared that I would run into a white supremacist. That just has never happened in my life. But lately, I have been real worried about going downtown, because I'm like, okay, what's going to happen?
100%, totally. So but that's but the thing is, the media winks and nods to Antifa too. So there's not going to be any headlines of that, like Antifa's an idea and it's totally nothing and it's a myth and it's safe and it's whatever. And everything's going to be like, look at this video of the Proud Boys brawling in the street. Look how terrible they are. They're evil. Look at Gavin McInnes, white, racist. That's what it's going to be. So
there's there's a really good interview. There's a channel on YouTube called 1791. They do like political commentary, but a little more from the center. I guess I would call them libertarian at best. They did one about a really interesting debate Tucker Carlson had with Ben Shapiro about automated jobs. And,
that's a big deal.
Yeah, it was really interesting, the video they made, because they basically, Tucker was saying that humans need to feel productive in order to feel like they belong, and the loss of jobs is why we're turning up with drug addiction and stuff like that. Ben Shapiro was saying, no, humans need spirituality in order to feel like they belong to something bigger, and that's why we're seeing drug addiction and suicide, because we don't have spirituality in America anymore. And they were making the point that maybe it's both. Maybe we need both, and it's not one or the other. So it's really interesting. But they did a full interview with Gavin McInnes about the ban from Twitter and kind of his legal stuff that he's going through. And it was interesting to watch, because it was like you said, the costume was gone, the cartoon character was gone. It was just a dude like trying to plead his case as to why he's not what he's been painted out to be. Just super interesting. So it's worth looking at.
It's hard, like seeing Gavin McGinnis, because there's a lot of things that I see that are like, it's like I see someone who's blind,
Mm.
almost getting it right. Talking about, hey, you don't hate yourself for being men, and like
Right.
genders have roles. There are gender roles, so these things that are like near hits on truth, but
Right.
he's just lost and blind, and so it's going to devolve into this racist, you know, sexist craziness, because that's all he knows is the cartoon character and just replicate what he's seen on TV. He's trying to be
Right.
Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino, like, and it's just so he's got nothing but fictional characters to model off of rather than like Jesus Christ and truth
Right.
and
I mean, the
biblical
Proud
scripture as
Boys
well.
is the Proud Boys is roughly Project Mayhem. Like that's what I think of when you talk
Yeah,
about it. That's what it sounds like.
right. But not
So
nearly as destructive. Like,
not as destructive, right? Not as
we're not
destructive.
organized, not destructive. Yeah, but I do see but it does speak to this culture of lost boys,
Mm.
mentality of like these men who have certain ideas and thought processes that are being told that are toxic, and it's like, don't be a leader, don't be in charge, don't, and so so the only way to lash out of that is to be a male chauvinist pig, and it's like, no, that's not, it's like you're missing it, but you're right, there's a problem, but that's not the
Right.
solution. This is not the solution. Yeah.
Part of that too, to branch off the debate into our topic for tonight.
Yeah.
One of the points that was brought up was about reopening the country. And when they hammered Trump about the economy, he was talking about how it's still closed and we need to open up. Biden was saying it costs a lot of money to open up, and one of the things he mentioned was schools, that it costs a lot of money because we needed to supply a lot of things to schools for safety precautions. A friend of mine was talking about how at a school they had one of those. He didn't know how to describe it except it looked like a leaf blower, but it just shot out sanitizer. So they were just like blasting down everything in the building with sanitizer.
Oh
But yeah, school is kind of nuts right now.
Yeah.
And, with everything going, I saw an article that 60% of people are saying that they're just not going to send their kids back to school when they reopen, which is now. So 60% of people are looking for alternate ways to educate their children.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about that, 60%. Like that's the majority.
That's
the majority that answered this questionnaire anyway.
Yeah, that's nuts, because I thought the general idea was that like we can't keep our kids from school. Like we can't homeschool our kids. We can't put them in private school. We can't whatever. Like they have to be in public school. I thought that was the general consensus. But you have a majority of parents saying we would choose not to send our kids to public school. So you're able to make that choice? Don't you have to go to work? Like, don't you, like that's weird. So yeah, that was really surprising.
Yeah, and I think what changed was the pandemic. When other options opened up and they realized like, oh, we can do this online, or we can hire a tutor, or any myriad of other options, it opened up their eyes to, well, maybe there is an acceptable alternative that we can still do what we need to do, but also get these kids educated. Yeah.
Have you heard of pods?
No.
It's like homeschooling in a group in your neighborhood with like 6 to 10 kids, and it's like the parents kind of get together and agree like, hey, let's get a teacher in, like, or they're all in the same class in the same neighborhood, but they don't want to send their kids to class. But it's like, I don't know how to teach my own kid these subjects or whatever. They'll do it online, but together, just so they can help each other with homework, and it feels a little bit like a class, but it's like 6 or 7 kids, and there's what's called pods. So it's like group homeschooling kind of thing, which is really cool, because you do still get that like social, the big stigma against homeschooling is that like, oh, they're gonna not be be socially inept, or they're not gonna be able to function in society and stuff. And it's like, well, first of all, it's not true. But
wait a minute, I saw a lot of girls at the mall in floor-length denim skirts, still wearing scrunchies in 2004.
Modest is hottest. I mean, no, yeah, it's just like the social whatever. But I mean, you still play sports, you still have family, you still have church, and other different organizations and stuff. And you get these, I think, a healthier dose of social interaction that kids have, rather than all day with 30 kids who you're just put in with you the same age. But a lot of different options opening up. That article I sent you about those pods, teachers are getting like jobs kind of independently, underground teaching jobs, teaching these pods and like, or a group of, small group of kids, and making more money than they would have made as teachers. So it's like a tiny little private school for like 2 or 3 teachers, and they can all get together and teach like 10 kids. So,
which, I mean,
really
that
cool.
just surface level, that just sounds ideal. Like a teacher
Right.
has fewer students to focus on so they can direct more time.
Right.
The kids have fewer people to compete with for attention so they can get more learning out of it. That just sounds ideal from the beginning. It also
Right.
sounds super old school. Like it sounds like a schoolhouse, basically.
Right. And I think that's
So,
how public school started, was much smaller, much simpler. And so when support behind public school was starting, it was like these kind of neighborhood pods. It was like your little village or your little neighborhood or whatever had a state-funded school, or like everybody pulled their resources together, built a schoolhouse, and you send all your kids there. You're not teaching them at home anymore. Because, I mean, public school for human history is an extremely recent development, but we treat it like it's been here since humanity started. Like that's just what school is. That's what education is public school. It's like that is the most recent development of education. For centuries and millennia before, education was the responsibility of the parents, right? And that but a lot of it was like, I'm going to teach my kid how to work the farm, so when he gets older, he can work the farm. And that was education. What does he need to know? He needs to know how to feed himself and hunt and farm and protect himself, and that's what I'm going to teach him, because that's how you stay alive. So there's a lot of survival skills, and that's just hunter gatherer kind of things, and that's where we started educating in the home, right? But yeah, so then that just grew. I mean, like after the Enlightenment and after food production gave way to technology, and people could form governments and bureaucracies and politics and stuff, but people didn't have to spend all their waking hours staying alive, right?
right.
They could think about other things like inventing things and technology. And you have the Enlightenment, and you have science and development of all these philosophies and sciences and stuff. So that led more to education, kind of as we know it, as like math, science, history, those kind of things. But even then, that was still primarily the responsibility of the parents. Until public schools came along. But which again, it's only in the last like couple hundred years of human history.
And the other charge against homeschooling that I hear a lot, and I think it's comical, especially now, is that homeschooling is a tool to brainwash your kids so that they think exactly like you. And that's hilarious now, because public schooling is a tool to brainwash your kids so that they think exactly like how the government wants them to, or how polite society wants them to, especially now. Like the pictures, there's a picture that was floating around about a school that had a banner that said, this school believes that love is love, reproductive rights are human rights, black lives, like all of the politically correct statements in like an elementary school, which is so bizarre. So I don't know how they can level the charge anymore that, well, private school is an indoctrination center, or homeschool is an indoctrination center. Well, so is public school. It's just, what religion do you want your kids to believe in at this point?
Yeah. It's the myth of neutrality.
Right.
It's the idea that there's this neutral ground that's like non-bias, whatever, and then from that you get religion and radical ideas and whatever. But it's not true. There's no neutrality. Like that's the biggest thing people can get pounded in their heads. There is no neutrality. Everyone has a worldview, even the teachers and government curriculum creators. Like they have a worldview, and your kids are going to be indoctrinated. There's no, I don't want to homeschool or private school because I'm afraid they're going to get indoctrinated, so I'm going to send them to public school. Well, there's no indoctrination. That's insane. That's completely idiotic. There's always indoctrination. It's just a matter of who is indoctrinating them and what worldviews are getting pounded into their head. They're going to come out with a worldview. A worldview is going to be taught to them. It's just a matter of whose. And I mean, the states, the secular humanism is a religion. It is a religious worldview. And the philosophy of naturalism, just like nihilism and transcendentalism and theism and like all these isms, naturalism is a philosophy. It is not a brute fact science. But it is the philosophy that is first presupposed and subscribed to where you get materialism, evolution, Big Bang, materialism, It's naturalist materialism. That's what it is. But it stems from the philosophy of naturalism. Well, why didn't we start with the philosophy of nihilism? Why didn't we start with the philosophy of existentialism? Why didn't we start with the philosophy of theism? Well, it's a philosophy. These are philosophies. Why are we starting with the philosophy of naturalism? And that's what's being promoted in schools. And then we think that's a neutral ground, and it's just insane.
And I want to say, why did we lose the ability to think in terms of worldview? But it's because we've all have been fed the same worldview through public school. So you don't think of naturalism as a worldview because that's the worldview that you're fed from the start.
Right.
That's just where it begins. So Dr. Bonson talked about that in one of his lectures. It's really good on YouTube. Bonson versus Evolution, I think is what it's called.
That's a
and
great
he talks about how evolution is not science, it's philosophy. And that sounds foreign to us, but when you think about it, it's true, because one of the things that evolution, science has to be repeatable, observable, and falsifiable. Evolution meets none of those categories, so it can't be scientific. It's philosophical in nature. Yeah. Right. So it's just funny that we've accepted a worldview not because we've tested it or proven it or thought about it deeply, but just because we've been fed it for so long. And generationally, we've kind of absorbed it as a way of thinking. Yeah. So we posted a video on our YouTube page this week. I had the time to sit down with a family from my church and talk about their homeschool experience. They've been homeschooling for a while now. They have 3 kids. Their oldest is, I think, 12. So they've been homeschooling for a little bit. And I kind of talked to them about homeschooling. And what really stuck out was one of the things that the father said. I asked about the idea of sheltering, because that's another thing that often gets leveled against religious people and homeschoolers, is the idea that you're trying to insulate your children from the world. You don't want them to know how things really are. And so I asked him about that. And the response he gave was really telling. He said, they're going to see these things, they're going to get out, and they're going to encounter them. And he said, I don't want to block them from how the world is. What I want to do is lay a foundation, and then I want them to build upon it. And I thought that was super interesting, because he's not trying to, iron fist their worldview and tell them this is what you have to believe. But what he wants to do is give them a solid foundation with which to analyze everything that they're going to encounter. Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's where it comes back to worldviews, because what your worldview is at the basis is going to be what you look at everything else through. That's why we call it a worldview, how you view the world.
It's your filter where everything gets passed through. Right.
So it's just, it's bizarre to me that there's so many Christian parents or even maybe people that wouldn't consider themselves Christian but do have some kind of a libertarian stance, or haven't fully embraced the nihilistic, naturalist, materialist idea, who do believe in some kind of absolute, that are just okay with their kids being fed a worldview from somebody else that they really don't have any idea what it is, because you don't spend that time with them. You're not in the school. You don't know what they're learning. You're just assuming that it's what you were taught. You're assuming that they're being taught facts and truths about nature and science and math and all of that kind of stuff. It's a really strange thing.
Yeah. Or you don't remember anything from school, and just like honestly, I don't think people think about it. I don't think people think twice about how are we going to educate our kids? Like, unless they're talking about private school, like some rich couple is like, we're having babies and we're going to send them to this nice private school, whatever. Like that's probably the only thought any parents ever give to it. I think for the vast majority is just public school. What do you mean? How are we going to educate our kids? Public school. They're going to go to. We're going to buy a house in a nice neighborhood with a good school district. So that, like, that's the goal in buying a house. That's the goal. Right. Is like, well, we got to be in a good school district for the kids. It's like, why? It's like, well, because it's like, okay, so they're going to buy an expensive house, or it's like somewhere they may not even really want to live, just because it's a good school district. So the kids can go to that public school. And it's like, why? But they're not even thinking about it. No one's even thinking twice. Like, this is just what you do. That's just what school is public school. It's free. I don't have to pay private school tuition. Couldn't afford it anyway. And so there you go. That's what you do. And both parents work, and I send my kid to public school, and we go to soccer practice afterwards, and that's life. That's just what you do. And no one thinks twice about it, and everybody's miserable. And parents don't know their kids, they don't know what their kids know. They don't know, they have no clue what's going on in their kid's head. And that's the whole thing of, like, oh, these Christian families with their kids in public school are so shocked and surprised and can't understand why their kid went off to college and just left the church and lost their
Mm.
faith. And they went to youth group every time, and they were there every Sunday, and they went to church camp, and they did all the activities. And I just can't understand why they went to college and lost their faith. Like, it's just this big mystery.
Mm.
And you know frat parties, alcohol, sex, freedom gets blamed, which has plenty of blame to take. But I think it's also the parents' responsibility to capture their children's heart for Christ at a very young age. And that's
Right.
the thing, is the kids will conform to a certain standard, but they won't be transformed, and they won't
Mm.
love the standard of God in the Bible.
Mm.
They'll conform because these are just the rules of the house, right?
Right.
I don't drink, I don't have sex, I don't cuss, I don't drink, I don't whatever. And those are just the rules. And then one day they don't have to anymore. It's like, okay, no one's watching me. I'm out of prison now, and so I can do what my heart always wanted to do the whole time, right?
Right.
And so you have kids conforming to standards rather than loving the standards, right? Or the parents never taught their children to love God's standard and desire to please God. So they've just been gritting their teeth till they're 18 and can move out and join the Navy or go to school or whatever they want to do, and literally do whatever they do. So you didn't lose those kids in high school. You lost them in middle school or elementary school. Whenever the kid checked out and was like, I'm just going to go through the motions of this Christian American culture until I don't have to anymore. And then I can just do whatever I want. And then maybe in my 30s, when I get married, I'll come back to church. So that's the mentality. That's how it goes.
I mean, a big problem with that too is the idea that we think of the mission field as something out there far away, right? Like when we think about missionaries, we think about foreign countries with people who don't speak English, who have never heard the gospel. Those are the people we need to be evangelizing. We don't think about the fact that, our neighbors need to be evangelized, or our friends at work need to be evangelized, or our family needs to be evangelized. Like, that's where evangelism should start, right?
Yeah.
And discipleship is a big part of that too. It's kind of lost in the church. We try. I think it's having a resurgence now, the idea of discipleship and older Christians mentoring younger Christians, but I don't think parents think about discipling their children in that way. And that's
as a ministry.
You're right, exactly. Like, I don't have time to get into it right now, but if we want to talk about like everywhere I've been in my life, all the ups and downs I've been through, it's been kind of all over the place. But one of the things now looking back that I always am thankful for is that my parents did lay that foundation when I was a kid, and that didn't go away. So like, even when I was out there, that foundation was still in the back of my head. Like, you're not supposed to be here. This isn't what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And instead, what we're doing is letting somebody else lay a foundation for us. So like the verse that we have on the screen, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. That goes both ways. Like, whatever foundation you lay is the thing that they're going to build on. So it can either be the correct one, the one that has the biblical worldview, the godly standard, or we can send them to public school where they're trained in a worldly standard, and that's the foundation they're going to build on. That's what they're going to come back to.
Yeah, it is that. And the problem is when we're kids, and I think I've mentioned this before, when we're toddlers, our sin can't ruin our life, right? Like, when I have a 3-year-old and 2-year-old, their sin isn't going to ruin their life unless they like get injured or like burn themselves. Like, they throw a tantrum in the store. That's not going to ruin their life, right?
Right.
And so parents don't. They just keep abiding sin and just like, he's a kid. He's two, whatever. And it's like, you're right. Sure. There's only so much responsibility, so much whatever. But then the kid starts getting older, and that abiding sin and just appeasement just keeps going until their sin can ruin their life. Right. You go from jumping on the couch and throwing a tantrum in the store or a restaurant or whatever to drunk driving and getting your girlfriend pregnant. Right. And you've been abiding sin the whole time. And then now all of a sudden they're teenagers and their sin can really ruin their life. And the parents freak out and start trying to throw a bunch of rules on. And it's not gonna work. It's way too late, right? The kid's already on his own and doing what he wants to do, and so it doesn't work. And so then they just kind of conform to this Christian standard until they don't have to anymore, and they leave. So that, the key is to, from what I understand, again, my kids are young, but just from, stuff that Doug Wilson says and things I've read, is that the parenting like technique or whatever is to rule an iron fist at the very beginning, hold everything really tight and strict, tie their shoes, cut their meat for them, and just have real strict everything. And then slowly, as they get older, take off, right? And give more liberties and restrictions, hoping that it's baked in, right? The values have been baked in. And so when and Doug Wilson gives an example when his daughter turned 15, something like that. So you can watch any movie you want. They were super strict on movies. You can't watch rated R, can't watch any movies, whatever. And that was like they're just instilling the values there. And then they said, we think we've taught you enough. We think you in this area you can make the right choice, and we're not gonna. You are allowed to watch any movie you want. We're not gonna restrict any of your movies. You want to go see a movie with a friend? You can, even if we hate it, we disagree with it. We think you've made that choice. And by then she didn't want to, because that value of pleasing God and wanting to do the right thing in that area was there, and so she didn't desire to do those things at that point. And so that's the point. That's the thing. You don't just wait until they start doing things. It's like, oh crap, I'm going to respond. I'm going to be reactive as a parent to what my kids happen to be doing, as if you have no control over that or involved in shaping that. And that goes with education as well, of what they start believing about life, about truth, about science. I mean, gender, everything. It touches everything, and those worldviews are connected. There's no escaping it.
And Doug Wilson, speaking of gender, he talked about this on his interview with, not interview, but the video he does with Dr. White, the Sweater Vest Dialogues. They talked about that idea of science and gender, and he was saying how in some ways it's an attempt to destroy the image of God, because humanity can't destroy God, right? We can't reach up into heaven and pull him off of the throne down here to take care of him. But what we can do is destroy the vestiges of his image here on earth, right? Yeah. So if that means destroying the idea of gender, because that's how he chose to create man and woman, then we do that. If that means getting rid of religion as he revealed himself, we get rid of that too. So it's this idea of not respecting the God in heaven enough to respect what he's given us here on earth. Right. Now, one point I want to kind of get to, and I kind of want you to talk about it a little bit, is the idea that a lot of people still do think I can't homeschool for whatever reason. Either they think they're not qualified to, either they think they can't leave their job, or they just don't know where to start. One of the general consensuses is, well, I can't do that. I think personally, if you, it's kind of a weird tangent, but there was a lot of, when I was involved with some anti-vax people, one of their big problems was, well, the school requires us to be vaccinated, so we want to force the school to change their standard. Yeah. And my suggestion was, why don't you just homeschool? If you don't like what the school is teaching your kids, then why don't you do it yourself? And that was just outright like, oh, that's ridiculous. I have a job. I can't do that. Yeah. And it kind of comes down to like, what do you value more, your job and your stuff, or your children?
Yeah. Yeah, that one's hard for me because I grew up homeschooling, and my mom was single and worked 3 jobs and homeschooled 2 kids. And so, I mean, I've kind of seen it done. Right. Wasn't very comfortable all the time, but I mean, my sister and I are not the people we would be that we are without that. I mean, I was on a fast track becoming a statistic. I was a single mom, poor neighborhood, public school, ragamuffin kid, just a idiot, even at 7, 8 years old, just bad kids and bad neighborhood and all these things. And she was like, no, that's not going to be for my kids. And so she did what it took to homeschool us. She yanked me out in 2nd grade and homeschooled us till I was in 10th grade, and we moved. So yeah, that one's a little hard because like I've seen it done. And there was this meme. It was like I can't afford a homeschool starter pack, and it was like big house, big car, nice, all these nice things. And I think it really does come down to like that. A big part of that is the 2-income trap, right? So we have a consumer world which is geared to a 2-income household, not a 1-income household, right? Especially with like young people starting. What's that? 3 jobs, yeah. But yeah, so a couple gets married. They graduate college. They thousands of dollars in college debt, student loans, right? They have their degrees. They have good jobs. They both start working. And with those two jobs, they buy cars and they buy a house and they buy a dog and they build a certain 2-income lifestyle for say like 5 years, right? 3 to 5 years. Travel, eat what they want, everything that balances up. And they have 2 incomes and say, wow, this is really great. We can afford this. And it's true, they can. And until they have a kid and the mom says, hey, I really love this kid and I don't really love my job very much. And I want to stay home and raise my baby, at least until they're 7 or, go or kindergarten or whatever. Well, that's about 5 years. So, but their bills are a 2-income bill. They have a 2-income house, a 2-income car, a 2-income everything, and they can't afford to cut their livelihood in half, right? So that's where daycare comes in. That's where schools come in. That's where the government comes in and says, hey, we'll watch your kid for you. All the property taxes you're paying with that 2-income property tax, 2-income house, they're paying for schools over here. So we'll take your kid and basically raise them for you. And so then what choice do they have? It's a trap. It's literally a trap. It's a 2-income trap. And they literally cannot afford on their livelihood, on their lifestyle that they've come to be comfortable with, afford to live on 1 income. And not to mention all the gender role feminist elements that go into that of like, you must work. You have to work to be a good woman. And it's like, you don't even know what a woman is. That's what I'll never understand about the transgender argument and the feminist argument is they can't even define what a woman is. What is a woman? A strong, confident person who takes charge. And you described a human. What makes you uniquely woman, right? And that's what I'll never understand. A transgender woman, a guy saying he feels like a woman. What does it mean to feel like a woman? You want to wear a dress? You want to put on lipstick? That sounds pretty sexist to me. That makes you a woman? You know what I mean? It's like, what about all these just natural, human, strong, good character qualities that you can't have as a man? I'll never understand. And in fact, I see it as extremely offensive for any man to say he knows what it feels like to be a woman and to have gone through the puberty of a young girl and all the things that entails of a menstrual cycle, of body image issues, of all those things. It is extremely offensive for any 25, 30-year-old man, whoever, whatever, to say, I know what it feels like to be a woman. I mean, that's just offensive. And girls to guys, if you've not gone through the puberty of that of a certain sex, male or female, you have no right, and it's extremely offensive to say you know what it feels like to be a man, to be a boy. You have no idea what it feels like to be a 12-year-old boy. So I don't even want to, like, it's just so insane to me. And you can't even define the two things anyway. So come back to me when you actually define what a woman is, and then I'll start hearing you feel like a woman.
But that's another thing that you can't learn at school. Like what you're talking about when you talk about gender roles and what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man. Whatever baggage you have with that's something that you kind of figure out from your family, right? Like the way that a man acts is the way that your father acts. That's the first thing that defines what a man is. Maybe as you get older, other stuff starts to pour in.
Yeah.
Maybe media, maybe other people in your life that starts to pour in. And what a woman is like is what your mother is like. That's what you start to see. And that's your first concept of that. But for a lot of us, that wasn't where it started. It was school. That's where they teach you like, no, well, this is what a man is, and this is what a woman is, and this is how a man should act, and this is how a woman should act. Down to if you guys haven't watched it, if you check our YouTube channel, the video on there is called Guarded Hearts, which I think is apropos to the subject we're talking about.
Yeah.
The father was talking about how public school is difficult for boys. It's not really designed for boys. The idea of sit still for 8 hours, don't talk, don't move, don't talk to each other, don't do anything. Pay attention, focus, listen to me. That's a very feminine way to interact, right? Yeah. I mean, we're friends because we worked together. Otherwise, we probably would have never have met in any other circumstance. Like men don't go out looking for deep conversation with each other to form friendships. I forget who said it, but they said women form friendships face to face, men form friendships side by side.
Yeah.
And in this, you've talked about it before, how public school sets you up for either an office job or jail. It's basically a factory to put you out through that. And it kind of is that. It's the cookie cutter. Everybody fits this mold. Everybody gets these scores. Everybody needs this test. That's how you do school.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the from desk to cubicle, or or jail cell. You have to ask to go to the bathroom. You have to, it's just this perpetual childhood. And that's the thing with like homeschooling, is that if you look at a kid in public school, going to class, bell rings, he moves, and you can look at a homeschooler, which is much more independent. What it looks like is someone working in a cubicle job that they hate. Kids hate being in school.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Versus someone who is their own boss, entrepreneur, has their own business, works from home, makes their own hours, the homeschooler is that person. The public schooler is the person trapped in a cubicle. And like those are the way the minds are being molded, basically. And there's exceptions, not everything.
Right.
But yeah, I think it does kind of form. Like, what do you want your kid to be? An employee or a boss? Like, I mean, I want my kid to be a philosopher king. So, I mean, like that's public school is not going to prepare him for that. So, and the whole thing too of like, well, I can't teach my kid, it's like, okay, well, why? Because I don't know enough about these subjects. So, well, didn't you go to public school? Didn't you go to school and learn all these things? It's like, yeah. It's like, okay, and you can't teach your kid these subjects and these things? No. Well, then why do you want to send your kid to those same public schools to grow up to not know anything and be able to teach their kid, right? I mean, because you don't learn in public school. You retain and regurgitate, right? It's not just we've lost the actual tools of learning, of like how to actually learn, and that it's just call and repeat. Call and response. And when you have 30 kids in class, that's kind of all you can do, right? You don't have the time to like piece everything and answer all the big why questions for all of them. Get the kids to learn how to think. You can't, you just don't have time. It's just true. Like just the circumstances of it doesn't allow for that. You're teaching to the test. You got to teach to the test so they can get your test scores so your school district can get more money.
Yes.
That's what it's about. Like that's the goal. So yeah.
It's an interesting way to put that, because if your kid's education is for test scores and test scores are for funding, then your children are a commodity.
Yeah.
That's how the school is going to treat them. Like these children are a commodity to get what we need. And I mean, do you want your kids to be considered a commodity, or do you want them to be considered an investment, which is, a different thing? I think we've been reading through Romans at church, and one of the things that we talked about, or one of the verses that we got to last week in chapter 5, I think. No, I'm off on chapters. But it was the portion where Paul talks about, since we've been given grace, do we sin more so that grace may abound? And one of the things he talks about in that chapter is that he says, once you were a slave to sin, therefore there was no expectation of righteousness on you, which is interesting because we don't expect sinners to be righteous, right? We expect them to be sinners. That's what you expect.
Right.
But when you're a slave to righteousness, there's an expectation of righteousness. And one of the things that I thought about with that was the idea of the talents, right? The parable of the talents was that when you were given something, you were expected to do work with it, right? And it wasn't that you were expected to do something far beyond your means. The person who had 5 doubled that, and that was okay. The person who had 2 doubled that, and that was okay. It was less, but it was still okay. The only person who was considered wicked was the one who did nothing with it.
Yeah.
And I don't think we think of our children as investments from God. I think one of the things that's kind of crossed my mind a lot, in the secular world, children are kind of looked down on. Yeah. They get in the way of like you were saying, when you have 2-income lifestyle, children get in the way. Now we can't travel. Now we can't do what we wanted. Now we can't have the career we wanted. So the idea is put off having kids as long as possible, if you even have them. And if you have one too early, all you got to do is kill it. Not a big deal. We got government funding for that. We'll get rid of it. So just on the numbers, Christians should be outnumbering secular humanists just because we have kids and they don't.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we're not. And the only thing that's the linchpin, the only thing that keeps that going, I think, is public schools. Because we keep having the kids, but then we send them to them to get trained, which is so bizarre.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, by sheer numbers, yeah, the godly worldview people should be outnumbering the godless worldview. But the problem is the godly people are the godly worldview minded people have the kids, and then they send them off to the godless people to the worldviews to be taught, and so they turn them godless. So it's like you're having them, but you're not doing the work of molding their minds and doing that. So yeah, you're right. The professor, the college professor, has no children. Will teach your children. That's what it just comes down to, and that's the secularization of the world. I mean, if all Christian families, even the evangelifish, typical American, especially them, were to yank their kids out of public school, the government schools would be done because the numbers are there. The numbers are there of Christian kids in America in public schools are huge. So if all the parents of Christian parents took their kids out of public schools, they'd be done. They just wouldn't happen. And we're kind of seeing that with the pandemic, right? I mean, it's like that's what's happening. Like even teachers don't want to go teach, and like they're just not, yeah. So and we see 60% of people not wanting to send their kids to public school. That's awesome. I don't know if those are all Christians, but just those are what's happening. But yeah, man, I think if she said it was like, what is it? Options create opportunities, or whatever. And like, man, you want to start a classical Christian education school, now is the time to do it.
And Doug Wilson talked about that. And one of his kids told the story. I forget if it was Nate or if it was Rachel Jankovic who told the story about being with him when he was giving a lecture at one of the universities. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I always talk about with politics is the reason that it focuses on the young people is because it's hard to convince someone who's 30 to change their worldview. But it's really easy to give someone who's 13 a worldview, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when Doug was speaking at the school, they kind of understood he's a lost cause. And they told him, we might not have you, but we'll have your kids, right? And he said, oh, you must be mistaken, not my kids. And he was right. He wasn't wrong. If you know his kids now, they're as gung-ho as he is for the Christian worldview and God's law and God's standards. They're in that same boat as he is because he did what he needed to do. They didn't have a school that they liked, so they started one. Yeah. And we're not saying everybody needs to start a school, but you at least need to take your children's education seriously.
Yeah, and there's of course someone's going to say, well, I believe the gospel. I'm a Christian and a faithful Christian, and I did public school my whole life. That's a lot of people because a lot of people went to public school. Right. So the majority of people went to public school, and so you pull the handful of Christians out and say like, oh, well, there's exceptions to the rules, or whatever. Right. So and of course there's going to be exceptions to the rules. Of course there's going to be kids who go to public school, get a chance, and again, this isn't like, any single mom with 3 kids working 3 jobs. I'm not saying this is ideal. Like this is what you ought to do. And so it's like, I don't want to add trouble and hardship to your life of like, now pull your kids out and homeschool them. Right. But the ideal situation would be to teach your own kids or to provide your own kids education, whether that is a private school or private tutoring or a Christian school. Or even just having your kids in public school, but being extremely involved with their education and knowing what they're learning. Go through their stuff with them. Like if you can't, if you work and both parents work, whatever, like make it a hobby of yours to be in your kids' business with school and know their teachers, know their friends, know what they're doing, know what their class, know their books they're reading. And so you can, immediately put out little fires that kind of grow of godless worldviews that might pop up, and so you're there to kind of whack-a-mole them down as they pop up, as they will. So that's an option too, that you don't have to, but just being extremely involved with your kids in public school, and there's high odds that kid will come out, with a heart intact for Christ, like,
Well, and one maybe kind of pushback I want to give against anybody who would say, well, I went through public school and I turned out fine. I think we forget that the world is different now. Like the world that we came up through and the world that our kids have inherited is not the same. Like at no point when I was growing up would we ever been confused about how to define male and female.
Yeah.
That just was not a thing. At no point when I was growing up did we have access to the entirety of the internet at the touch of a button. That was not a thing.
It's a big game changer.
Huge. So, I mean, to say, well, I went through it and I was fine. You didn't go through the same world that they're going to be going through. And I think that's important to factor in. And once again, I'm not saying fence them off from the whole world, but you need to understand that the rules to the game have changed. It's not the same.
Yeah. And that's how it'll always be. Like with our parents, with their parents, and with our kids and their kids, it's going to be a different situation raising them up. So it's like, oh, well, they're going to experience the same public school I did. No, they're not. Right. Like, it's completely different. There's no metal detectors, in my elementary school. Now there are, and that's another thing too. Like, this is just insane of school shootings and girls cliques and eating disorders and just sexual. I mean, it's just insane. Like, there's so many, like when I went to public school, and I was considered when I went to public school when I was 15 in 10th grade. And I would say I went to a good school, on pretty good school district in San Antonio. But I was going from homeschooling. I was going from homeschooling since 2nd grade to 10th grade, new city. Didn't know anybody, and I was like freaking out, going to public school. And the first day was registration and all that. You get your school ID, right?
Right.
So we're standing in line, and I'm just like, stand in line, whatever, get ready to take my picture to get in school ID. And a couple people in front of me, they're talking, oh, hey, I forgot to say, my parents are out of town, so we're going to get high this weekend. And I was like, not to me, they said that to each other. And I heard it, and I was like, oh, I've never heard kids talk about getting high with each other. Like, about it. I thought it was a movie. Like, you see this in the movies, and like, oh, that's so corny. That doesn't happen. That's just, but it does. It's like, wow, okay, there it is. Like, oh, I saw. And then I think that same week or like very early on, this kid sitting next to me in class, and he's like digging in his shoe for something, like in his sock, and like weed comes out like a pack, and I kind of just like look down and see it, and he looks up at me and is like. And it was almost like I saw him open up some gum, and I'm gonna ask him for some.
Right.
And he was like, he kind of looked at me with that kind of obligation to be like, yeah, I can pick you up, man, if you want, whatever. And I was just like,
right.
Oh, no, it's okay. But that's better than what my sister saw fall out of a friend's backpack in the middle of class, which is a handgun. Rihanna was in class, and this kid was reaching his backpack and a handgun popped out. She saw it and saw him. It was like, and I think like the teacher saw it too. So it was like, that was it. And so, but yeah, it's like, holy crap. Like, what? They make bulletproof backpacks for kids. At what point are you going to quit your job and do something about raising your kids, right? Like, I have to send my kids to public school. I probably should get them this bulletproof backpack because I got to keep my job.
Vacations don't pay for themselves.
Yeah. And I think what's crazy too, and like the pandemic is really showing this, is that a lot of women hate their job. If you're a doctor or a lawyer or some kind of humanitarian, something like changing the world and helping, like you've invested so much in your career and you have a master's degree in this and you're doing great things and stuff and you have a baby, you're like, man, this sucks. Like, I really invested in this and I love this. And I find a lot of purpose and meaning in my job. But I also find a lot of purpose and meaning being a mother. There is that conflict there. That's true. That's real. But I think a lot of moms just like work at the bank or at Walmart or something, and they just hate their freaking job, but they have to keep it because they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they just have to do it. They'd much rather, I think there's so many moms that would much rather stay home with their kids, raise their babies, especially babies. Like newborn babies, like those first few months are so impactful for kids as far as like overstimulation of a daycare as a newborn, and like all the science is there, and a lot of women are seeing that. This isn't even a Christian worldview thing. This is just a scientific fact of just overstimulation for newborn babies. The best thing for them is to stay with their mother for the first few months. It's like, oh, we need more maternity leave. It's like, okay, do you love your job? Like what? Again, that's what it keeps coming back to is like, a lot of women just don't really like their job, but have to work. They'd much rather stay home and raise their baby, at least for the first few years of their life, those formative
Right.
years, but they can't. They'd have to go work at Target. You know what I mean? Like, it just sucks. It's like, man, that sucks. They don't want to go to this job, deal
Right.
with their boss and customers or whatever bullcrap they have to do in their stupid job. Like, this isn't a career. This isn't a whatever. But a lot of women have to work a job they hate rather than raise their kids, and that just sucks, man. Like, that's like that really, really sucks. And that's the two income trap. That's just like the worst. The one thing, if you love your job and find meaning and purpose in it, and there's that real conflict of what to do. But it's another thing, if you just hate waking up in the morning, going to work, and hand your kids off to some strangers at a daycare, and just like, sucks. Like, that's a pitiful situation. And I really hope this pandemic can kind of change some of that, as far as people's lifestyles changing and really finding out, reprioritizing what's important, especially with their kids.
And one of the things that kind of resonates with me, especially this week, I've been kind of seeing play out when you talk about how it's important for them to be with their mother. I'm starting to realize how many behavioral issues stem from a lack of either attention or feeling like you have attention from your parents. Right. So my son this week, I've been with him a little more, and there's these times when he's just flipping out and he's losing it. And there's times where he's totally calm. And what I've, started to understand is the time when he's calm is when we're together playing. And the time when he's flipping out is when I'm doing something and he's having to play by himself. He wants and so it's like, what do you want? I want your attention. Yeah. That's what he wants. Yeah. I want to know that you're here and you care. That's what I want. So I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people who maybe resented their parents because they did feel kind of cast off or because they were uninvolved. And I think, especially now, it's kind of in vogue to be kind of a hands-off parent. Let them figure out the world for themselves. Let them discover who they are. But that's not what they need, and that's not what they want.
Yeah, they want structure. They want someone to tell them, what am I supposed to do? What's right? Where do I go?
Rebel Without a Cause, when he that big climactic scene after the car's gone off the cliff and he doesn't know what he's. You better tell me what to do, and you better tell me now. Like, he just wants some answers to something.
Right. Yeah, but that's like, we've got a bunch of child psychologists talking about like, what to do, and it's like, well, what's good? They leave them alone and let them fend for themselves and stuff. And like, to a certain extent, there is a something good about not accommodating every tiny insignificant need for your kid. Right. Let them struggle a little bit and face some things. But as far as guidance and like big picture stuff, like, no, they it's the word. Like, I heard parents say, like, when it comes to religion, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to any like important thing, I'm gonna let I would hope that they read a lot of different things and kind of form their own opinions on it and world. I've got my world, bias and worldview and stuff, but I want to kind of let them form their own. What that means is someone else is going to form it for them. They're not like, you are responsible for forming your kid's worldview or doing your damnedest to form that. If you don't, someone else will. There's no like they're going to piece it all together themselves because the innocence of youth and the humanity of like, no, someone is going to come in and be like, hey, I'll tell you where to go. I'll tell you what to do. This is true. Right. This is what's going on. Like, someone else is not going to be so timid about it as you are for your own kids. And they're going to teach your kids something, and it's probably not going to be what you have in mind. So yeah, there's no neutrality. There's no like just piecing it together. Someone is going to indoctrinate them, and it better be you.
Right.
That's like, so with this, this really great book again, Doug Wilson, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. I swear, this is not the Doug Wilson podcast, but it kind of is. We mentioned like, we really seriously need to have a drinking game of like, every time someone mentions Doug Wilson, we do it. But I mean, he's just doing like everything we want to do: publishing books, podcasts, multimedia, pastor, starting schools. I mean, this is everything we're talking about. So of course we're gonna gravitate to this solid Christian leader. But anyway, which by the way, we'll plug, next week we will be talking to the man, the myth, the legend, Douglas Wilson. Will be speaking with these two nobodies. And about his new book. Yeah, he's written like over 90 books, but his latest one, we reached out and he's gonna actually come on and talk to us. It won't be live, but we're going to record it and then we'll publish it later on the podcast. Will we publish the video later too, or
it's a little unclear on that. If all's good, then yes, but for sure it'll be in the magazine, which I want to plug too. If you guys are interested in that, the interview will be in there, and also there'll be an article about this, the whole idea of homeschooling and where to start and how to go. If you want one, they are still free. We're going to publish pretty soon once we get everything finalized. It's been kind of tricky figuring out how to write articles when you don't write articles for a living, but we're getting it together. So all you have to do is email us, timestamp zine, your name, your address, and we'll make sure we get you one for free. Absolutely free. So just make sure you get to us.
The original plan was to do one themed on school for September. But then we got this Doug Wilson interview, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we should wait for that to like kind of kick off. And so we're going to wait for that to be able to kind of transcribe that into the magazine and kind of talk more about our conversation with Doug Wilson. So, but yeah. So anyway, this book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, An Approach to Distinctly Christian Education. Amazing, fantastic book. Every parent thinking about educating their kid in the Christian worldview should read it. But this is a really cool part I wanted to read. It says, obviously educators want to get the students to think in class, but the real goal should be to get them to think in the hallways between classes, right? So that's how like you're really teaching a kid to think. It says, education is a completely religious endeavor. It is impossible to impart knowledge to students without building on religious presuppositions. Education is built on the foundation of the instructor's worldview and the worldview of those who develop the curriculum. It is a myth that education can be non-religious. That is, that education can go on in a vacuum that deliberately excludes the basic questions about life. It is not possible to separate religious values from education. This is because all the fundamental questions of education require religious answers. Learning to read and write is simply the process of acquiring tools to enable us to ask and answer such questions. That's it. That says everything I'm trying to say. Like the education, language, logic, science, reason are building blocks to answer the big questions that every person asks. And public schools right now, they barely give you the tool. They don't even give you the tool efficiently enough, let alone the answers, the processes to answer the big questions that drive anything a kid's going to do, a career he takes, a family he leads, anything. The public school is just completely inept of doing any of those things, right?
It's really interesting to frame them in that way too when you talk about language, logic, things like that, because that is directly what secular humanism is going after right now. Like even language, even definitions. Words don't mean what they mean. Words mean whatever you want them to mean. They have the meaning is fluid, just like gender is fluid. Everything is fluid. It's whatever you want it to be. It's interesting to see it framed that way. They get it. For some reason, we just don't get it. Like whoever controls the language controls how people think.
Yeah.
And we should know that because there's a whole book about it. In 1984, that was the whole idea. Nothing means what it means. Everything's been changed. All records have been falsified. That was what was really interesting in 1984 when he talks about how they police language so that you don't even have the words to think about what you're trying to think about the system. You can't even put an idea together because you don't have the words to put the idea together.
Right.
That's kind of where we are now.
And that's so there's something called classical Christian education, CCE, which I would be a big proponent of, which we plan on homeschooling our kids in that, or you're trying to start a private school with our church or get involved, because there's a classical Christian education organization here in San Antonio that kind of co-ops with homeschoolers with that. So which we completely plan to do. And that came from Doug Wilson, but also came from Dorothy Sanger. She wrote an essay like in the 50s and that Doug Wilson read and was like, this makes a lot of sense. And it was about recapturing the lost tools of learning. Yeah, Dorothy Sayers is her name. She wrote a book called The Lost Tools of Learning. And Doug Wilson recovered the lost tools of learning in promoting this homeschool program basically called Classical Christian Education, which is the classical, logical, rational method of the Greek classics, Aristotle, Plato, and things with Christian values and worldview, right? And mold those to think logically and rationally, but with an actual real substance of Christianity.
Right.
And so with that, with how the grades would go, and I forget the actual breakdown of like the age and the grades and stuff, which is you start with, it goes through, it's the not trifecta, but like the three, it's the grammar, logic, and rhetoric, right? So grammar is to kids when they're little. They like to call and repeat. They like to memorize. They like to just download and absorb information, right? A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Right.
So that's when you teach them that. You teach them all the parts. You teach them all the letters, all the words, all the things to teach them, and the numbers and everything, and the building blocks of learning. So they have it just like embedded in their head, just imprinted in their head. And this goes for language, verb endings, and like all kinds of things for different, for Latin, for Greek, for anything. And it just gets like burned into their brains, right? And then logic is like middle school, kind of towards high school age,
right.
When they start putting these things together. Like, how do these things all fit together? Like, how does it work? How do you form a sentence? How do you form an equation with these letters, these numbers and letters? How do you put these things together and kind of string it all together with what came before, right? Rhetoric is the expression of these things in high school. So the expression of these things is, well, now I'm going to write an essay. I know what the words are in letters.
Right.
I know how to put them together in a way that makes sense. Now I'm going to express myself with an essay, right? So that's the grammar, logic, rhetoric kind of trifecta of the tools of learning.
Right.
And these can be applied to anything: math, science, history, biology, English, foreign language, everything you need. Like, you can learn the building blocks, learn how to put them together, and learn how to express yourself in those things. This is something public school is just not done at all. So,
well, I mean, I went to private school, and I know there's a lot of parents who would think, well, our kids are in a Christian private school, that's good enough. But the concept you just laid out is not a concept that I had in private school. It wasn't that idea. It's still memorize and repeat, memorize and repeat, memorize and repeat.
Yeah. I mean, most Christian church schools are just public schools with praying.
Right.
I mean, there's no difference ultimately.
And there's even mine was, I don't want to, it wasn't that my school was horrible.
What was the name of your school? What was it called?
So first of all, I want to preface this by saying that I have a son, so my heterosexuality is confirmed. My school was called Rainbow Hills Baptist School. Rainbow Hills Baptist, two things that shouldn't be together in a sentence, but they are.
Rainbow. I don't think so.
But we had a feeder system, kind of. So the first red flag for me was that we kind of got we went through a Becca books.
We did a Becca,
yeah, right. And on the surface it was fine because I learned to read and everything like that, and I actually read pretty quick because of the phonics system that they had. But if I'm not mistaken, right, that comes through Bob Jones University, right? I think, or is it Pensacola?
Becca. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, but the feeder system was one of the colleges that came to speak to us every year. We had two. One of them was Dallas Baptist, where I went for a little while, which is all right. The other one was Pensacola Christian School, which, yeah. If you don't know Pensacola Christian College, please look them up because it is everything that we want you to know that we're not talking about when we talk about a Christian worldview. It is,
independent, fundamental, Bible believing, Bible preaching, church.
We're talking like extreme, like male and female sidewalks, stuff like that. Like, so, clarification.
I don't drink, I don't chew, and I don't date girls that do.
It was a trip. And what's the reason I bring all that up is because growing up going through private school, that terrified me. I was horrified that that's what I was being set up to go to. I did not want to be that, and I didn't know there was an alternative. Like, when we talk about someone like James White or Doug Wilson or even a Jeff Durbin, someone who's Christian but also articulate and well-read and able to deal with difficult topics and engage on a level that in a independent fundamentalist Baptist level you can't. Like, when we talk about, exactly.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. Engage the culture.
Right.
Don't hide from it.
Right.
Engage it. Learn how to answer it. Yeah.
And right now, at this point, the time for hiding is done. Like, it's time to meet it head on. So the first step to that, I think, is private school. Not even private school. I'm sorry, homeschool. If you're sending your kids to public school, you're sending them ill-equipped, and they're meeting it head on. You want to have them equipped to meet it head on. One of the reasons I wanted to call it Guarded Heart, this whole topic, is because when I talked to the father at my church, one of the things he said that really caught me, and I was like, wow, man, that's deep. He said, we're in charge of guarding our children's hearts. And I don't think putting them on a school bus at 5 years old to figure out the world by themselves is guarding their hearts very well. And that was,
I can't even imagine.
Especially now, like everything that's out there, I just can't fathom.
I remember being 5 years old on a school bus. I remember being 7 years old on a school bus.
That's terrifying.
It's just like, God, like nothing good, nothing constructive or edifying or fortifying, nothing.
And maybe to end on this when we talk about this discussion, but one of the big things, if you haven't watched the video, I can't stress enough. I go to church with these people, so I know them personally. I can vouch for them as far as they're not crazy. So when I talked to them, and we sat down for about half an hour with each of them, but I boiled it down to a 4-minute video to kind of get in the high points. One of the things that really came out, and I think is a lost virtue of Christianity, is the joy that they have being around their kids.
Yeah.
Like the whole exuberance that they had was like, we get to spend time with our family. What could be bad about that? That's such a lost ethic in the world, but even in the church, I think we kind of think about it in the same way. Even when we talk about kind of church itself, like we still have sequestered age groups, right? Like the kids have to go over there because I can't focus while my kids are in the room with me, right? Or, and it stays that way up until you graduate high school. You're in the youth group. And youth group is glorified babysitting.
Then you go to big church.
Then you go to big church, right? Exactly.
Big church. And children's church. And then you go to big church. You gotta be quiet.
Oh man. So I just think it's weird that when I, once, I don't mean to pour on myself, but when I was doing my own thing, I didn't know anybody who had kids and they didn't want to have kids.
No.
Once I came back to Christianity, once, by the grace of God, I was brought back to this worldview. Everybody had kids, everybody loved having kids, and everybody wanted to have more. It's literally night and day, and I can't stress it enough. And obviously the people that you want to be around are the people who enjoy their life. And the ones who didn't have kids, they may not have wanted to have them because they thought it would interrupt their lifestyle, but they didn't like their lifestyle. They didn't like what they were doing. They didn't like themselves. And the people now who I know who have kids, who plan on having more, they actually enjoy all of it, which is, imagine that you find meaning for your life in God. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Yeah. It really is kind of I think a more male problem. I think men are just indoctrinated by our culture to put off adulthood and responsibility as long as possible, prolong adolescence.
Yes.
Just, 20, 30 is the new 20, and all these things. And it's like, marriage and children, that's game over, man. That's they locked down. Oh, this, and it's like, that was such a pathetic, sad way to look at it. But I mean, it's kind of where our culture is geared, and that's what I would call toxic masculinity, if at all, is just this prolonged Peter Pan syndrome, this adolescence of like, I'm just gonna party and play video games and have fun and be free and whatever. Like, I remember this guy I used to work with. I still work at my job. He doesn't work there anymore. But he, which actually I think, well, I don't want to claim too much credit for his liberation, but he's a young guy straight out of college and working this job that, corporate shill, is what we are. But so day jobs, and he was telling me, he's like, I had this my girlfriend all through college and through high school and stuff, and it was great, it was wonderful, everything, but she moved to Spain for this teaching thing, and I didn't really want to do that and stuff, and but everything was great, but we had to break up and all these things, and I was like, why? I was like, what? And like, he even like showed me a picture of her, and I was like, they're like about to get married and like go to Spain or something, and like he's gonna go with her, but he didn't, and I was like, wait a second. And I saw they were at Disney World, so I showed a picture, and I was like, wait a second. So you tell me you could be living in Spain with her, but you're here doing this? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I think you screwed up, man. I don't understand. Like, you get a handful of opportunities to do something cool like that, and you wasted that one. Like, what are you doing? He wanted to be free. He wanted to be on Tinder. He wanted to be, and it's like,
right,
bro.
That's for the dogs, brother.
Like, that's insane. Like, that's so dumb, and it is this just like stupid boyish,
right,
adolescent, thing, and it's just like to be put off rather than to be pursued, rather than be like, I can't wait to be an adult and like be responsible and like have a job and work and produce and have a family and lead them and whatever. I had a boss, old school conservative boss, who used to say,
Uh-huh.
I miss a time when men were men and women were happy. And I think that is, a lot of women are looking for a good man to marry, not
to
some
be
boy
to be a man in the first place.
yeah, like to be a man. They want a man to love and follow and have children and have a family. And I think that's where a lot of feminism came from, is the men not being men. And like that's where a lot of it comes from, is just men not taking responsibility and throwing that off, and then women marrying the government and just sending the kids to public school and doing the whole thing. But I think it's a big male problem as far as leading family, leading children, raising children, and like having that really be a significant goal in men's lives. I think if that changed, that would be leaps and bounds for humanity.
And, the craziness of that is almost where it comes full circle, where we find common ground with like radical feminists. Is you've seen this argument before, where when we talk about being anti-abortion, women will talk about how, well, if I am stuck with this child, then there should be something that makes sure the man stays around also, because this is also his responsibility. And I'm like, oh, you mean marriage? You're talking about marriage. Like, that's the institution that makes sure that the man stays around to be a part of the family and contribute to the raising of this child. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You just don't have a worldview that gives you it's just, C.S. Lewis put it that we'd rather be playing outside with mud pies when a feast is waiting inside for us, right?
Yeah.
But
we're far too easily pleased.
Yes, because those are our mud pies.
Yeah.
I don't know who made that feast, but these are my mud pies. I made these. We're so proud of them.
Yeah, it's insane, man.
So
there's hope in Christ,
hope.
in Scripture.
Yes.
And following God's model for men and women and family and those things. Absolutely.
And maybe to end on just this verse, because I think it's forgotten and lost, and just kind of this idea when we talk about education, it shouldn't be strange that we talk about it from a Christian perspective. The fear of the Lord is beginning, wisdom and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And I believe in the epistles, it also says that all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Christ. Like the whole idea through and through in the Bible is that to find wisdom, you seek Christ. To find wisdom, you seek God. To find knowledge, you seek the Holy One. I don't know why we don't think like that anymore. Like, we think it's a separate thing. Like, we can get knowledge apart from God, which, I mean, talk about Eden, right? Like, that was the whole gimmick. It's like, okay, you can take knowledge for yourself apart from what God is willing to give you.
Yeah.
It's bizarre that same trick, we fall for it constantly.
Well, I mean, we're just evolving into absurdity, like the Piper said, we teach these kids in public schools that they're really nothing but animals. And then we get surprised when they're killing each other in these schools like animals. Like, what are we teaching about humanity, of who these kids are? You're stardust. Your evolved societies of bacteria. There is no truth. Okay, well then guess what? That matter is going to start colliding into other matter.
Right.
And guess what? We care. We actually do care about that, because we know there's a God. We know that things ought not to be that way, even despite what the academia might teach us.
Right.
trying to teach us.
So to bring it in, Solomon, what have you been reading this week?
Well, I didn't read this week. I read this a long time ago, but it's next on my book review. How to Die by Seneca. This is the book of 2020. Like, I read this like in June or July. I was like, when we're halfway through 2020.
I think I ran into you when you were picking that up, or you had just finished it. Yeah,
one of those. These are cool. So this is How to Die by Seneca, ancient Stoic philosopher, Seneca. These are from Princeton Press. Yeah, let me get that right. And these are called the Ancient Wisdom for Modern Readers. So these are like really very accessible, very readable, ancient literary philosophical works by philosophers. What's really cool about these is that they have usually on one side of the page they have the English, and on the other side they have the Greek or Latin, like whatever the original language was. Which was kind of cool if you know how to speak those languages. Which if you were raised in a classical Christian education, you could read those languages. Seriously, if you do the classics at all, this is what we're talking about, the classics.
Right.
But this one has it like at the back. The first half is English, and the last half is Latin. Looks like. Yeah, it's not Greek. So that's very short, very small. So this is actually half of the size that it actually is, because the last half is in Latin.
Right.
So the first half is in English, but it's just very like for the modern reader, ancient wisdom for the modern reader. But this was like this was Seneca's philosophy of how to die well, I guess. And Seneca didn't believe in an afterlife, so yeah, if you don't believe in an afterlife, why stay here if you're miserable? That was kind of his whole point behind this book, which is kind of weird because it's like at least he was consistent, right? It's like, look, there's nothing before you were born, there's nothing after you die, and if that's what you believe, and you're in miserable pain and like agony in this life, just check out. And that's what is like. It's kind of like, yeah. It says human condition is a good one in that no one is unhappy except by his own fault. Are you pleased? Then live. Are you displeased? Then you are allowed to return from whence you came. You often let your blood to ease a headache. Well, they used to. A vein, bloodletting. A vein is cut right through as a means of weight loss. I would not recommend that. It takes no deep wound to split apart your vitals. The road to that great freedom is opened with a small blade, and safety is gained in a snip. So he's saying just kind of nick a main artery, and you're out.
Wow.
Yeah. You're just like, wow. But I think there might be some things kind of lost in translation, because later on he does say too, it's the mark of a great soul to turn back toward life for the sake of others, for the sake of others. And great men have often done so. Nothing seems more disgraceful to me than to wish for death. You know, so it's like, there might be some things kind of lost in translation as far as like what he valued life, because I think he did.
Right.
He was actually forced to commit suicide. This is him doing it by Nero, the beast from Revelation that post-mill people like Julian, I believe. Nero, forced him to commit suicide in this little basin to like basically slit his wrists and commit suicide. So he kind of knew what he was talking about, I guess, of how to die. But it did remind me of Philippians 1, where Paul is talking about for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall choose I cannot tell. I'm hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ. That is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account, right? And that's kind of what Seneca is saying. To just gain some truth from this of like, for a great soul to return back toward life for the sake of others. And great men have often done so. I'd say Paul is one of those great men that have done those. Who has done that, who's chosen to live. So you see Paul kind of struggling with this, like to live as Christ, to die is gain. And, I have work to do while I'm here for your sake to do it. But I really want to go see Jesus. Like, and if you know anything about Paul's life, that is understandable. But so I don't know, it's kind of interesting, like to see this pagan, godless worldview, ancient philosopher kind of getting things right as far as like live for others. If you're going to live, do it for others. And that's, we have work to do. Because that was, somebody asked like, well, if you're a Christian and you're going to go to heaven in some amusement park in the sky when you die, why don't you just kill yourself? Isn't that better? Like, I was like, yeah, but we have work to do, and to live is Christ. Well, that's a pretty good reason to live. Right. And so we have work to do as sort of sharing the gospel. And that's the Great Commission. The Great Commission is not some death cult to go kill yourself and be in heaven. Like just punch your heaven ticket and then come up here. It's no, go and to all nations and share the word of Christ. So to live is Christ, to die is gain. But there's also this idea of what I think a Christian could take away from this book is where he says, but to those who live for hope, each moment as it draws near slips away. It instills greediness, and the thing most wretched and cause of all most wretched things, the fear of death. Right. And so that kind of reminded me too of like death, where is thy sting? Like, we should not fear death in that regard, as far as like this life is all we have, so we got to cling to it and make it, the best we can. Right. We should, but do as much as we can. But we don't. Our hope is not in this earthly world, in this life. Life is a vapor. We're a blink and we're gone. And to live is Christ anyway. So like just reading this as a Christian, just kind of understanding the value of life, the consequences of death, those things, kind of things. Really interesting, really quick read. Like you probably read this at night. And you can say you read Seneca. So like, again, but yeah,
And,
How to Die, recommend it. Kind of, don't kill yourself. But.
I know you've pumped up some of the other ones too because they've done a whole series. So what are some of the other ones they have in there, just in case anyone is interested?
The other one by Seneca that I've read is really good. There's a whole series of books, which they look they're all how-to. They're all in these right. So this one is like selected works from Seneca on serenity of mind. Like that's the actual Latin work. And then there's an actual Latin work from Seneca called De Ira, like from anger, on anger is like what he's talking about. And so in the Prentice academic Prentice Press, they're in these little how-to books. My lovely wife just brought these to me. Look at that.
Nice.
How great does that look on your shelf? Oh, good.
And it's even more impressive when someone opens it and there's Latin inside.
Yeah, right. So the other one that I would really recommend that I'll probably do a review on is How to Keep Your Cool. So this is on anger. And then you're like How to Be a Leader by Plutarch, How to Win an Argument. I haven't read this one yet. I just bought this one. Cicero. And then How to Think About God by Cicero, which is, stoic pagan idea of God. But really cool books, really quick reads, really accessible and readable if you want to like read the classics but like don't know Latin. That's a great way to do it. But yeah, the other one I would recommend is that How to Keep Your Cool. And look at this crazy guy on the front. A Roman losing his cool, right? And Seneca was a tutor to Nero, so I think he kind of knows what it's like to lose your cool and the values of it. That actually really did help as far as like do not dish out discipline in anger as a parent. How to keep your cool, like kind of really focusing on anger. Really, really cool stuff. So I'll probably do a recommendation on that one too. But this is just the next one on my reading list that I read this year. So How to Die.
Available where all books are sold.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all that. So recommend that. But don't kill yourself.
So read the book, don't die. So cool. I feel like this was a good discussion. I feel like we gave you we're just laying a base for you. We're not telling you how to do it yet, but if you get the magazine, we might actually give you kind of a roadmap on how to do that. So once again, if you're interested in that, it's absolutely free. All we need to know is where you live and what your name is. So send us an email. I'm samzine@gmail.com. We'll make sure we get you one of those. But do it soon because we're going to have to go to print soon. So I'm going to say the cutoff date is going to be the 15th of October. If we don't have an email from you by the 15th, you're not getting one. So late October, we're looking to get them out to you. Cool. So until then, I'm Julian. This is Solomon. This has been The Time and the Place. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Bye.